When did having too much talent become Toronto's biggest nightmare? Picture this. You're Brad Treliving, sitting in your office overlooking Scotiabank Arena, staring at a roster that on paper looks deeper and grittier than anything the Leafs have assembled in years. You've added the sandpaper, brought in the playoff warriors, and addressed every concern from last season's early exit. But now you're facing a problem that would make most GMs weep with envy. You simply have too many capable players fighting for too few spots. In the twisted world of NHL roster construction, the Toronto Maple Leafs find themselves drowning in their own success. After years of criticism about their lack of depth and playoff toughness, Treliving has systematically addressed every weakness. The additions of players like Dakota Joshua and Nicholas Roy have injected the kind of physicality that playoff hockey demands. Scott Laughton brings the two-way reliability that can anchor a bottom six unit. These moves were supposed to solve problems, not create new ones. But here's where things get deliciously complicated. Elliotte Friedman dropped a bombshell during yesterday's first intermission broadcast on Sportsnet, suggesting that the Leafs forward group is primed for another significant move. The mathematics are brutal and unforgiving. There simply aren't enough roster spots for all the players who deserve them. This isn't about clearing salary cap space or making room for prospects. This is about established NHL players, each with legitimate claims to roster spots, being forced into a gladiatorial battle where only the strongest survive. It's the kind of organizational depth that championship teams dream of, but it's also the kind of headache that keeps general managers awake at 3 a.m. At the center of this roster puzzle sits Nicholas Robertson, a player whose story embodies everything frustrating about modern NHL roster construction. Both Friedman and Nick Kypreos agree on one fundamental point. Robertson should be a 20-goal scorer at the NHL level. The skill is undeniable, the offensive instincts are legitimate, and the potential remains tantalizing. But here's where the conversation gets uncomfortable for Leafs management. When the playoffs arrive and the Florida Panthers or Tampa Bay Lightning are throwing their heaviest hits and tightest defensive schemes, can Toronto trust Robertson to deliver? More specifically, has he developed enough from last season to earn the faith of coaches who must make split-second decisions about ice time in elimination games? This question cuts to the heart of the Leafs' organizational philosophy. Do they prioritize skill and offensive potential, or do they lean into the playoff-tested grit they've worked so hard to acquire? Robertson's $1.825 million contract for 2025 to 26 represents excellent value for a potential 20-goal scorer, but value means nothing if that player becomes a liability when games matter most. The cruel irony is that Robertson's ceiling might actually be higher than some of the players expected to make the roster ahead of him. But in hockey, potential doesn't kill penalties in the third period of Game 7, and it doesn't win board battles against the league's most punishing forecheckers. Friedman's analysis didn't stop with Robertson. He specifically mentioned Calle Jarnkrok and David Kampf as players caught in this roster crunch, creating a three-way battle for what might be only one or two available spots. The numbers tell their own story. Kampf carries a 2-year commitment at $2.4 million annually, while Jarnkrok has 1 year remaining at $2.1 million. These aren't fringe players fighting for their NHL lives. They're established contributors who played significant roles for Toronto last season. Kampf brings the defensive reliability and face-off expertise that playoff hockey demands. Jarnkrok offers versatility and veteran leadership that can be invaluable during long playoff runs. Under normal circumstances, both would be locks for opening night rosters. But these aren't normal circumstances. The Leafs' aggressive pursuit of playoff-ready depth has created an embarrassment of riches that forces impossible decisions. Someone with legitimate NHL credentials will likely be watching games from the press box, or more probably suiting up for a different organization entirely. What makes this situation particularly intriguing is how it positions Toronto for potential upgrades elsewhere in their lineup. Having excess depth pieces isn't just about roster management. It's about ammunition for trades that could significantly improve the team's championship prospects. Consider the possibilities. A package involving two of these three players could represent attractive value for teams seeking depth and reliability. Robertson brings upside and affordable scoring potential. Jarnkrok offers proven versatility and playoff experience. Kampf provides defensive stability and leadership qualities that contending teams covet. For organizations looking to bolster their bottom six units, these players represent the kind of proven commodities that can make the difference between first-round exits and deep playoff runs. Their contracts are reasonable, their track records are established, and their skill sets complement the gritty, defensive-minded style that playoff hockey rewards. More importantly for Toronto, moving one or two of these players could create the salary cap flexibility and trade assets necessary to pursue a significant top six upgrade. The Leafs have already addressed their depth concerns. Now, they might use that depth to solve problems higher up their lineup. Sunday's preseason opener against Ottawa provided a fascinating glimpse into this roster battle. All three players, Robertson, Jarnkrok, and Kampf, were in the lineup, and all three contributed offensively. It was the kind of performance that simultaneously showcased their value and complicated Treliving's decision-making process. These weren't players going through the motions of preseason hockey. These were professionals understanding that every shift, every scoring chance, and every defensive play could determine their immediate futures. The intensity was palpable, the stakes were clear, and the performances reflected the desperation of players fighting for their careers. But here's what made their strong showings even more significant. They weren't just playing for Treliving and the Leafs coaching staff. Every GM in the league was watching, evaluating, and potentially calculating what it would take to acquire players who might suddenly become available. What the Leafs are experiencing represents the harsh reality of building a championship contender in a salary cap era. Success requires difficult choices, and those choices often involve sacrificing good players for the possibility of great results. The organization has methodically addressed every criticism from their recent playoff failures. They've added physicality, improved their defensive depth, and brought in players with proven track records of postseason success. Now, they must decide whether that improvement is sufficient or if further upgrades require additional sacrifices. This roster crunch also reflects the evolution of Treliving's vision for the team. He's clearly prioritized players who can contribute in playoff environments, even if that means potentially moving skilled players who might struggle in those same situations. It's a philosophy shift that prioritizes proven reliability over theoretical upside. As training camp progresses and the regular season approaches, Toronto faces decisions that will define their championship window. The luxury of depth becomes a burden when every choice potentially costs the organization valuable assets. The broader implications extend beyond individual players. How the Leafs navigate this roster crunch will signal their true priorities and provide insight into their championship timeline. Are they willing to make the ruthless decisions that championship construction often demands? For fans watching this unfold, the coming weeks will reveal whether Toronto's aggressive roster building has created the flexibility to make one final push for ultimate success. Sometimes the most difficult decisions lead to the most rewarding outcomes. Which of these three players do you think Toronto should keep? And who would you trade to upgrade the top six? The roster battles are heating up, and your predictions in the comments could prove more accurate than the experts. Give us your take, and smash that like button if you're as fascinated by these behind-the-scenes roster battles as we are.